the lecture today. Okay, so thank you everyone for joining today. Truly appreciate your time. So today we'll be focusing more on the pre-coding techniques, which in details will be like what you should prepare before for your coding interview. So for outline for tonight, we'll be explaining about what are technical interviews, preparation before the interview, breaking down the technical interview components timing, and pre-coding technique and some rules for mock interviews. So let's begin. So before we start, there's a disclaimer here. Tips is not an absolute guide on how things will be done, as every company is very different and every interview is also different. So uh you should not assume what we teach is like a full guide for you to do, but all the tips we provide are actually transferable. So you can apply the tips and confidently approach the technical interview with confidence. So let us start. So last week you guys have learned some tips on how you should prepare for your resume and apply for the roles that you're interested in, right? So besides that, you also been submitting some LeetCode questions for preparation for some online assessment. And for this lecture, it's like the first in the three-part series that should cover the interview aspect of internship application. As you can see, interview is the last part before you actually get an offer for the company, and it actually plays quite a huge role for you if you want to get the job that you are interested. So before we understand how does a technical interview goes, we should know what are actually technical interviews are. So what are technical interviews all about? So at most tech companies, technical interviews are more on checking about your algorithms, your understanding to algorithms, and asking you to answer some coding question, and it forms the largest components of the whole interview process. Generally, most of the interview they will last about 45 minutes to about an hour. It sounds a bit long, but believe me, when you are doing that, actually the time flies pretty fast. And generally, they will ask you about two questions, and within the time frame provided. So, and actually a lot of people have some misconception that they think you're there to solve the problem uh independently, like you are not supposed to ask anything question, you should just answer everything by yourself. But actually this is not the case. You're actually supposed to solve the question together with the interviewer. So you also need to write a because you can't just tell like, oh, my idea is this and that and this is the pseudocode provided, and actually this will not be accepted. So to clarify like what I say just now, like you're not supposed to solve everything by yourself. You can always ask the interviewer to clarify any doubts that you have, like you have any confusion about the question provided. I believe most of the interviewer are very willing to help you, but also bear in mind not to ask each and every minor details in like maybe like in 1 2 minutes you're asking too much that would not leave a good impression too. So yeah, you need to keep a balance between answering it yourself and like asking and collaborating with your interviewer. So you might want to know what the interviewer are actually looking out for when they're doing your technical interview, right? So the page take a while to load, so let me let talk a bit. So usually what happened to the site? Oops. Let me try to click again. Oh, okay. So, what there's mainly five parts of the skill that the interviewer would like to look out for. So, for first part, of course, like one of the most important part is how is your analytical skills. Like the interviewer would like to see how well you will solve the problem. Do you need a lot of help from the interviewer? Are you asking a lot of questions? You're asking like, oh, is this the correct thing? Am I going in the right way? So they want to see how well your thinking skill is. How will you approach a problem when you think? What are the algorithms you consider and all of that? And also they will want to know like how optimal your solution is. Do you understand maybe the time and space complexity of your solution? if you consider any of like what do you prioritize, like maybe time complexity over the space or vice versa. So these are what the first part of the skill that the interviewer are looking through the process. The second will be the coding skills. Like the interviewer, after you explain what you thought for the solution, are you able to actually translate the algorithm into a clean code? So actually this part, abstraction plays a big role because you might talking about a lot of your ideas, but you have to show the interviewer like you know what you're talking about and you can actually implement your ideas. And they will see this through the coding part when you are carrying out your interview. And the next thing, of course, they will want to know how much of computer science relation fundamentals you have gained in your previous times. Like whether do you have a strong foundation and do you know like the relevant technology for the role that you're applying for. Like let's say if you're applying for a data scientist role, do you know about all the fundamentals that you should know? And next thing, the interviewer might ask you something about your past experiences. They would want to know, have you ever tried to make a good technical decision before, and how your portfolio is like. For example, they may ask you like, oh, what did you gain from maybe your past internship or any school project you have done before, or maybe any hackathons you have joined, what experience you have gained from it, and what are your thought process. The next thing, also they will want to know company and how are your communication skills, as communication skill is a very important skill if you are working in a company. So they will ask you maybe some behavioral questions and ask how like to see how you communicate with them. And some company they actually even might have another round of interview to determine like your culture fit and your communication skill. So next, oops. So what are the parts that interviewer will want to look out for during the interview is they will actually keep an eye on your data structures and your algorithms, your foundation and all that. And your goal is not to memorize the algorithms that is common maybe in LeetCode. You see a lot of people use like sliding window and you see the clarification, you just memorize it, but actually to know how to implement it and when to use which. So, and common library function are fair games. You can use it, but you need to know the language you are using well to actually make full use of the common library functions. And last, oops, and specific questions about concept are less common unless your role need that concept very important, or you claim you are expert to it. Like let's say when you apply to a role, you say like, oh, I'm an expert in database and maybe networking. Then maybe the interviewer would like to validify, are you actually being honest? Do you actually know the concept well? And they might ask you about it. So another question that usually people would think is like, why do they want to ask about coding question? Is it like even some good candidates might not do well in like real lifetime coding? And do you really need to know your data structure and algorithm well to like do well in a job? As like some people might think, oh, if I'm applying for a software engineer, why do I need to know DSA so much? So it turns out that actually data structure and algorithm are most likely used to by interviewers so they can understand how are your thought process in and how you think about and like tackle hard problems during your interview process. So like they through the coding interviews they can be able to understand like how you understand the question and how you come out to the approach to it, how is your thinking process and all that. So they will also want to know if you can verbalize your ideas and actually implement them. So they want to see how well you can communicate what you are thinking. Because sometimes you might be able to just code out whatever you is in your brain, but when someone asks you to explain, if you're not able to do so, it's they will cause some difficulties in communication and collaborating. And they also want to see if you are able to implement your ideas. Like sometimes you might have a lot of ideas, but if you can't implement this, the things cannot become practical and it's not a good thing. So moreover, they also like to see how you consider certain trade-off like time and space complexity, like why would you choose one other another, like you and how you prioritize one over another to maybe evaluate your critical thinking skill when you solve a problem. And actually basic knowledge on data structure and algorithm is more important than you think, as it help you to have a better approach when you maybe like you're designing a database for your project, or you want to extract some data from like a deeply nested data, and you want to like make your code the cleanest and also the most efficient. And most importantly, interviewers themselves have considered their trade-off, and they would rather have a false negative than a false positive when they are interviewing the candidates. So now we'll move on to type of coding interviews you might face. So the first one and the most common one, not the most common one, the first one is the closed book one. It's like you uh solve a problem without any reference to any API. So it's like you can't like just Google search anything, like it's fully closed book. You need to use your experience and your knowledge you have gained before. And the next one is the opposite, which is open book, which allows you to reference to like certain API that the companies allow you to do so. It's a rather niche interview and is actually not that common. It tests you on like your specific skills, like your ability to code out a program that calls like maybe the company specific APIs. And it actually highly dependent on the company. So yeah, it's not that common. The next one is no execution code. No execution interview. Like you won't compile your code and there's no execution allowed. The interviewer may do so for you. So on the opposite will be execution allowed, so you might need to code out a program and run and produce some output at the instance, but generally not that common. And uh the type of interview, another one is online interview, which is pretty common nowadays, and you will use an online collaborative editor. Like you might or you may screenshot your ID when you are in a Zoom or your Microsoft Teams session, that you like you screen share what you are coding, and they'll see the live coding. And the less common nowadays is physical one, and usually you write to code on a whiteboard, like you're having your test, you're writing down your code, yeah, without compilation. So among like these types, generally the more common one will be closed book, no execution, and also by online. So yeah, you can keep that in mind. And it's also important for you to clarify with your company that you apply what kind of interview you'll be going to, so you can have a better preparation before going through the interview. At the end of the day, if you want to be successful in a technical interview, it's not about mastering like the coding skill or mastering everything in your communication skill. It's the best to find a balance between the two. Like you can see this Venn diagram, it's best for you to be in the middle of these two circles. So focus on mastering both equally, as they are both equally important. Next, we'll move on to preparation before the interview. So of course, you need to prepare a good personal space when you're interviewing. You don't want to be interrupted by others, or like having a very noisy background, as that will interrupt both your thinking, also you will leave a bad impression for your interviewer maybe. So try to find a quiet space free from distraction. Maybe it can be in your room, you can book a space that is quiet, or you book a meeting room for your interviewing process. Next, it's important to check that your internet connection is good. You don't want you to suddenly lost connection during the interview, as yeah, it's not that good. And if you're in school or you're in a public area, consider using a hotspot instead, because Wi-Fi is not really reliable. Sometimes you might lose connection, like especially in campus. So yeah, you should also always plan some uh alternative solution for all kind of situation that may happen. You may need to have a backup plan, like maybe if your Wi-Fi, your hotspot really went out, what should you do? Or if like anything happened. So yeah, always have a plan B, have a backup. Next thing is double check your technology. What I mean is both hardware and software. So you should install any drivers that you need, maybe for your camera, for your keyboard, for any of your, maybe your Zoom, your Microsoft Team, they need updates. Yeah, make sure to check them before you start the interview, as if you do it too last minute, maybe you'll be late or you might have some technical issue. Test out your camera and microphone, as ensure they are working and your interviewer can hear you clearly and what you are talking about. And yeah, no better way to do this than to do a mock interview, which you guys may have a chances in the upcoming weeks to actually practice between you and your peers. So, and some company, they might even provide you some mock interview assessment online, so you can practice out and test out their platform if they have a specific platform for you to do so. And last, understand the code editor or the platform that you'll be using. If the interview allow you to use any IDE of your choice, make sure you have configured well for your language of choice. Make sure like if you're using Java, you might want to use IntelliJ rather than other platform. Like use the one that you're most familiar with. Don't suddenly try to go to, oh, actually I'm learning VS Code now. Why not? Because yeah, it's best to use a code editor that you're familiar with and all the technology that you know. So you won't need to tackle extra problem during your interview process. And also, of course, practice coding with while on Zoom, because it's very different on coding without uh any screen sharing. Because like for example, if you're on Zoom, you can see right now there might be a little panel with different configuration. It might block your code or anything. You might be affected by that. So be familiarized with the page so you can, yeah, sorry. And also do try to familiarize yourself with the platform that you are using. So let's say some will use Zoom, use Microsoft Teams, some use Google Meet, or they might be you interviewing on CoderPad, or some company they actually have their own platform to do so. So yeah, do try to familiarize yourself with it so there won't be any big problem with it. So the next part is we'll be breaking down the components of technical interview. So you can imagine you are working around the some clock of it, like example, like about 45 to 60 minutes. So generally you have like 45 to 60 minutes for your interview. And actually important to keep your introduction succinct. So maybe you have went through some scholarship or like courses interview before. You might want to introduce yourself, or I came from this background, I have done this, I have I have this strength, this sorry. I have this strength and all these thing, but give me a second, sorry. Okay, sorry about that. So you might want to start coding in the first 5-10 minutes, if you uh use too much time on introducing yourself, you might take up your time that you can actually use to do your coding. And the interviewer will actually ask you more questions if they are interested to anything like your portfolio or anything that you are stated in your resume. So yeah, keep your introduction succinct, as this is not the main part that the interviewers will be looking out during the interview. Okay. And always assume that there will be two or actually more than that question. You won't actually know how many questions there will be, but generally, usually they will ask about two questions. And you should spend around 20 minutes coding for each of the question that you will be answering. So that I think some of you might have the question also, why should I assume there will always be two or more than that questions? So generally, usually they'll ask two questions, and the reason is they would like to ask you a warm-up question, like a easy one or a more general question, and one harder question. Or they'll ask you a question that introduce a twist for it as a second question, like they add in some more condition, or uh asking you to implement something very similar but to tackle. But however, even if you're not aware of how many questions will be asked, it's always good for you to try to solve as if you'll be doing two. Sometimes the interviewer will decide like how many questions to ask depending on how fast you do the question. Like example, if you do two question very fastly, they might ask you like extra question to see what's your ability and what's your maximum capability. And actually, the more the question you can do, the more information you're giving them. Like you're giving the interviewer more idea of like, oh, you have this much of knowledge and you have this much of skills that you can do. And you're also showing more how your approach to tackle hard problems, like how you consider a trade-off, and also of course communicate with the interviewer about your ideas and implementation. So you might be worried, so will I be penalized if I can't go through all the two questions? You might be worried, oh, if I only answer one, is that means 100% failure? Um, don't worry, there's no need to panic if you don't think you can finish the question in time. So a good interviewer, they'll actually try to stretch your mind the best during the interview to see your limits. They would maybe provide you some hints to guide you through, but do be strategic if you feel like time is running out. Do the stuff that the best to showcase your ability, like prioritize like uh maybe some part of the question that you want to show the like you want to show the interviewer that you actually understand the question, but maybe some certain problem that caused you to not to answer it in time. So some summary and overview of the technique that I mentioned just now. The first 5 minutes when you're answering a coding question, so you should have a proactive communication with your interviewer. You can ask them to, because sometimes they will just tell you the question verbally, they won't have a page like LeetCode telling you all the details for you to read. So it's best for you to have a proactive communication, maybe taking down notes on your hand or like on the screen, what the interviewer is saying about, clarify with them. Are you understanding the question correctly? Is there any things that you are considering, you want to clarify your doubts? It's best to do it in the first 5 minutes. And after you have clear understanding of what the problem is, then you can start to design the algorithms. And don't design your algorithms like quietly just type out. It's best for you to have a communication like to selling, oh, so I think based on this question, this is it will be my approach, and I think this will work because of why, something like that. And the next 10 minutes will be best spent on maximizing your correctability editors and talk as you coding. So like you will try to implement what you have designed for algorithms, so you can you start to code and you can like explain what is in your mind when you're coding, why you're writing this line and what you are trying to do. And the last 2-3 minutes is to handle some mistake. You might have some typo, or you might have missed out some part in your code, is for you to clean up your code and also to test whether your code runs or not. So yeah, so without further ado, let's delve into all the pre-coding techniques that I mentioned just now. And yeah, my friend should continue with the next part. Okay, let me stop sharing my screen.
So hello everyone, so I just continue with the pre-coding techniques. So starting off with proactive communication. So to understand this concept, we will need to define proactivity. So being proactive involves controlling a situation by causing something to happen rather than responding to it after it happened. So if you proactively communicate during the interview and avoid panicking and scrambling before you begin coding, you can get what you need, get organized, and set a positive tone for the remainder of the interview. So a common pitfall to avoid is coding immediately after receiving a question. So we tend to do this especially when we get excited because we have seen the question before or know the concept that we are being tested on upon first glance. But you leave a better impression on your interviewer if you do not start coding immediately and proactively communicate. So how do we proactively communicate? So we can proactively communicate in 3 parts. Firstly, we should listening carefully and even take note of the keywords as it will come handy later in the interview. Then we can move on to asking great questions, which we will demonstrate later in the presentation. So lastly, we should also aim to draw an example to demonstrate your understanding to the interviewer, and I'll share examples with you on this too. So firstly, listening carefully. It's crucial to listen carefully because generally interviewers always provide useful information. So you will need to listen out for keywords or unique information. For example, if the interviewer starts off by saying, given 2 arrays, they are sorted. So you probably need to know the data is sorted as the optimal solution for the sorted array is slightly different from the optimal solution for the non-sorted ones. So if your solution isn't making use of all information that you have been given, you're unlikely to reach the optimal solution. So to maximize the chances of reaching an optimal solution, we suggest to type out all the keywords either you hear or see in the question. So the step 2 of proactive communication involves asking questions. So your goal at the end of asking question is to ensure that you fully understand what's the input, what you're expected to do, and what's the output. Naturally, this is the best time to clarify any ambiguity and validate your assumptions. And most important, it's important to ask about how they want edge cases to be handled. If you miss out on how to handle an edge case, you may be questioned a bit about it later. So to avoid that situation, ensure that you have done your best to handle all edge cases by asking the interviewer how they want to do so. So to contextualize these tips, let's take a look at, for example, of how to ask questions. So let's say the interviewer asks you to design an algorithm to sort a list. What can you ask? You can firstly ask like, what sort of list? Is it an array, a linked list? As will influence which algorithm you will use. What does the list hold? Numbers, characters, strings. Let's say the interviewer specifies the list holds numbers, then we can ask, are they integers? And where did the values come from? Are they IDs, values, or something? Any special characteristics about the items? And also how many items are there? So these are mere examples of what you can ask, and there are many questions that are not included in the slides. So, what we shared are questions specific to a particular problem. A better guide for you to follow is to ask general questions, like how big is the size of the input? How big is the range of values? What kind of values are they? Are they negative numbers, floating points? This is a good way to determine what cases you may need to take into account when designing your algorithm. So you may also ask like, will there be empty inputs such as empty array or linked list? This is a great way to determine an edge case. You may also ask, are there duplicates within the input? And what are some extreme cases of the input? So you may also ask, how is the input stored? If you are given a dictionary of words, is it a list or a tree? This information is extremely useful as it helps to evaluate the complexity of your solution. If the tree is constructed for you, you do not have to construct one for yourself, and that can reduce the complexity of the algorithm significantly. So, on the third step, you can draw an example. So, once you are clear about the question, it's good to come up with one or two examples to run through and make sure that you understood everything correctly and even find patterns that you didn't see before. These examples can be handy because you can use them for testing later. But you also have to be smart about the example. Don't come up with ones that are too large, such that it takes too much time to run through, nor ones that are too small, which will probably not reveal any patterns. So let's evaluate the following example. So do you think that this is a good example for a binary search tree question? So perhaps you can note down your evaluation somewhere and see if it matches ours. So actually, it's a bit too small to observe any patterns from it. So neither it is specific as a BST should contain values. What if the numbers contained within affect how the problem should be solved? It almost always does in BST, so it could be more specific. And this is actually a special case. It's not only balanced, but it's also a perfect tree where each node has two children. So special cases can be deceiving. They are not ideal for us to derive patterns from. So this is why you have to be strategic with the examples that you draw. That way you can make sure that you understood everything correctly and find patterns that you didn't see before. So to briefly summarize, for successful proactive communication, we will need to firstly listen carefully as the information interviewers provide are always useful. Ask questions to clarify any ambiguity, validate assumptions, and manage edge cases appropriately. And lastly, to draw strategic examples. So the last pre-coding interview technique you need to leverage is designing your algorithm. So please take note that you shouldn't be coding anything until you have designed and run through your algorithm with the interviewer. So you make sure that you have discussed your design with the interviewer, that the interviewer understands your algorithm and it's alright with you coding. So the best way to do this is by explicitly asking the interviewer we have run through the algorithm. If it makes sense to you, may I begin coding? So the majority of the time, the interviewer will give a thumbs up and let you proceed unless they need to clarify other details in your solution. So your first step after the previous step, proactive communication, should be to state a brute force solution. So some candidates don't state it because they feel that it's obvious and terrible. But here's the thing, even if it's obvious for you, it is not necessarily obvious for all candidates. So you do not want your interviewer to think that you're struggling to even see the easy solution. So sometimes the brute force solution may be the best possible solution, but most of the time it's not. And when you can do is start off with the brute force solution and explain the space and time complexities and then start improving it. And all in all, brute force solutions are good baselines to get the interview started and to demonstrate that you understand the question well. So you can consider these two cases. So let's have a look at the interviewer's evaluation of a candidate who does not utilize the pre-coding tips. In this case, it will be noted that the candidate clearly understands the problem and recognizes the less efficient solution, but it doesn't state that it's obvious. On the second evaluation will be spending 10 minutes trying to come up with an optimal solution, but isn't very clear in communication, so the interviewer struggles to follow. The next one will be starting to write code, but does not arrive at a working solution and have no time to catch up and catch any bugs since there are no time to test. The last one will be the runs out of time to explain the time and space complexities and trade-off between different approaches. So in the second case, a candidate who implements the pre-coding tips will be as evaluated as someone who does not have a good, strong grasp of the problem, because they have never seen a problem like this before. But ask the interviewer a few questions, then spends 10 minutes sketching some diagrams to arrive at the brute force solution. Thirdly, and then you start writing code for the brute force solution, makes a few errors but catches them without hints when testing since they have time to test the code. And also correctly explains time and space complexities and discusses potential areas for improvements. So which candidate would you want to choose? So interviewers tend to lean towards candidate 2 because they have sense signals on how they will approach challenges in their day-to-day tasks in an effective and efficient manner. So now you know how to reach a brute force solution. So what's next? Our next step is to optimize our solution. Note that in the process of doing this, make sure to discuss complexities every step along the way. And to optimize your solution, here are the steps that you can do, which we will detail in the next few slides. So firstly, you can apply general tips. Next one will be look for BUD. The third one will be DIY. Fourth one will be simplify and generalize. Fifth one will be base case and build. And sixth one will be data structure and brainstorm. So starting off with general tips, should ask yourself, is there any unused information? If you know that the array is sorted, you could ask, have I used this? If not, can I do so to make my solution more optimal? There are times where example provided to you is not helping you understand the question presented by the interviewer. In this case, use a fresh example. Sometimes you may see a new pattern. Thirdly, you can trade space for time or vice versa, which is quite a common technique. You can choose which to prioritize by asking the interviewer explicitly what they are looking for. You can also pre-compute information so that the subsequent solving is easier. Lastly, you can use a hash table. They're extremely common and important, and if you are stuck, try to see if you can use a hash map. So the next one, we can now move on into the specific of finding optimal solution by looking for BUD. So what is BUD? Bottlenecks, unnecessary work, and duplicated work. So for bottlenecks, even if you optimize your ON step to O1, if you have a O n log n step, the overall runtime will still be that. So try and identify the segment of code that has the highest time or space complexity and focus on optimizing that as it will be more effective. Unnecessary work can stand for extra steps. So you can ask yourself, can I terminate my code earlier? For example, is there a for loop that you can end once you have found your solution instead of iterating through the entire data structure? Asking these questions will help to optimize your solution significantly. And lastly, you should look for duplicated work. Consider asking yourself if you are doing the same thing in multiple places. Is it possible for you to pre-compute information and store it in a data structure so that the subsequent solving is easier? So another approach is with a three-letter acronym, is a DIY approach. So you might here you try to imagine that you are solving the problem in real life. What might you do? So for example, when you pass a dictionary to someone who doesn't know that binary search, it's likely that they will still do binary search to a word in real life. So you can make this connection to the real world to help determine an optimized solution to your brute force algorithm. So after you have applied two general tips, BUD and DIY approaches, you can work towards simplify and generalizing the problem. So this involves tweaking some constraint of the problem to make it smaller or easier and solving that first. Once you have solved that, then you can generalize your approach to solve the original problem. So for example, if you're trying to form a paragraph from a given array of words, you can try to simplify it to forming a word with a given array of characters. Then you can create a solution where you can use an array to track the frequency of each character, which is your approach to the simplified problem. And now you can upsize this solution and make it more generalized to use a frequency hash table for paragraphs and words. And this is how you can employ simplification and generalization to design a more optimal solution. So next up, we have the base case and build technique. So as the name suggests, you can begin by solving for a base case, such as when n equals to 1 or n equals to 2, and so on. Then figure out how to derive n equals 3 from the previous two solutions. So if this concept sounds familiar, then you have been revising your DSA topics well, because this is a method relating to recursion. So you can get more recursive solutions, which you can try to convert to an iterative one, if possible, as the reliance on the call stack is eradicated. So it improves your space complexity, and iterative solutions tend to be faster as well. So your last resort will be the data structure brainstorm, which you may have already used in CS 2040. So all you do is run through all the data structures that you know of and try to apply each one to the problem. So you can ask yourself, when an array work, a stack, a linked list, running through all the data structures you know of will help you to identify one that's more appropriate to use for a solution that you may not have considered previously. So this is most applicable when the problem is highly general and it seems like many solutions are possible. So that was a lot of information. So let's summarize the process of designing an algorithm. So we can start off with a brute force solution to demonstrate that you understand the problem well. And next, you can optimize that brute force solution by applying general tips, looking for bottlenecks, unnecessary steps, and duplicated work. Using a DIY approach to conceptualize the problem with a real-world perspective, simplifying the problem, solving it, and then generalizing the solution. Creating a base case and building from there, and also by brainstorming and all the possible data structures. And also, we can always discuss complexities and trade-off at every step. So, perfect. Now you have designed an optimal algorithm, and once your interviewer says that you're good with your algorithm, you have the green light to start coding. Techniques to apply while coding will be covered in next week's lecture. Okay, so let's try some problems together. So the first problem will be, given a list of numbers, arrange them in a way to give us the largest number. So as a simple exercise, you would need to drop some questions in the Zoom chat if you want, and then that you will ask if you were presented this question by the interviewer. So I just go through some of the possible questions. So some of the questions you could have will be like, what do you mean gives us the largest number? How many numbers are in the list? How long is each number? Will there be leading zeros for numbers that are not zero? Will the numbers be negative? And what is the return type? So I'll be going through the second problem. So the question will be given an array numbers of size n, return all the numbers that do not appear inside. So firstly, you should ask clarifying questions. So are all elements guaranteed to be positive and reading 1 to n? Secondly, can the array contain duplicates? Can nulls ever be empty? What should we return if there are no missing numbers? And what is expected from the output format? So firstly, you will start off with the brute force approach, and you will outline your idea to the interviewer. So you can tell them, I know the answer must be some subset of 1, 2, 3 to n, and then I can look k from 1 to n. And for each k, you can scan the entire array nums to see if k ever appears. So if I don't find k in nums, I add k to my result list. So then after that you can walk through an example. So you can take let's say nums equals to 3311 and n equals to 4. So then you will loop k from 1 to 4 and scan the nums each time. So when k is 1, then you will scan the array, and then you firstly you compare the first element it's not 1, and then compare to 3 so not compare to 1, and yes, so we know 1 is present. And then you move on to the next one when k equals to 2, and then you scan the array and then compare to the first element 3, no, the second element 3, and the third and the last element. So since we never saw 2, 2 is missing, and then you add to the result. And then you will continue this for the rest of the array. So after you walk through the example, it'd be good to give like a complexity analysis to the interviewer. So let's say for this approach, for each k in 1 to n, I will do like an ON scan of nums. So this will make the time complexity of ON squared. So after you go through the brute force solution, the interviewer might prompt you to ask you to optimize your approach, and that's when you can give your approach, or you can also if you are able to think about optimal approach early on, you can also share it with the interviewer. So again, you will outline like your optimal idea. So for each number k that could be placed at index k minus 1, then scanning the final array for any position where the value isn't equal to index plus 1, immediately tells us which numbers they are missing. So we can achieve that by repeatedly swapping each out of place element into its correct index one at a time until no more swaps are possible. So afterwards, you can walk through with an example. So you can give a random array, maybe like 2, 1, 4, 4, and then the size of the array be n equals to 4. And then you will start from I equals to 0, and then at index 0, the value will be 2. So it be correct slot, which will be index 2 minus 1 equals 1. And then you will check index 1, which currently holds the value 1, not 2. So we perform a swap between position 0 and 1. And after swapping, the array becomes 1, 2, 4, 4. And now at the index 0, we have value 1, which matches index plus 1, and we'll leave it and increment I to 1. And then when I equals to 0, the current array will be 1, 2, 4, 4. And in index 1, the value is 2, its correct slot is index 2 minus 1 equals 1. It's already there, so there's no swap. And then you move on to increment I to 2. So you continue this for the rest of the array, and then after swapping the loop finishes, the array will be 1, 2, 4, 4. And then after that, you can give like a final summary where you can say the final array. And then after that, you can work on the complexity analysis. So because each element participates in at most one or two sorts before either landing its correct index or finding a duplicate at its correct index, we advance on I only when element at I is already in place or can't move further. And this is during the duplicate situation. So n is less than 1, possible swapping then incrementing loop still visits each index a constant number of times. So after that, you can do a single straightforward pass from index 0 to n minus 1 to collect any positions when num j is not equal to j plus 1. And altogether, this is the O(n) time. Yeah. So these are some of the like possible ways that you can approach like a question during the technical interview. So next will be the Kurisu, a demo by Le Yu.
Okay, hi everyone. So now that we have gone through, the coding techniques, we also have things like mock interviews for y'all to practice. So let me just show y'all the platform that we are using for this for the mock interviews. Okay. So give me a moment. Okay, so for the mock interview, what's going to happen is that we will assign every person randomly with another person in the program for the mock interview. This will be done on the Koditsu platform. So the Koditsu platform is basically a technical interviewing platform. There's also there's eventually things like interviewing training, assessment training, things like that. This is currently in development by NUS AICET. So we're basically somewhat like their beta testers. So you can try out this platform. Okay, so what's gonna happen is that you will receive an email. The email will look like this. So it will mention who you're paired with, and it will also show you the interview link itself. As for who you're paired with, we have more instructions on that later. So what you need to do is to go on Cosmology, find their email, email them, then from there you can schedule when you guys want to do the interview. Okay. So when you first click on the link, what will happen is that it will send you to a login page. As you can see on the left, there's a login to continue. On the right side, this is what happens after you click login to continue. You can sign up, you can log in, things like that. So after you log in, what's going to happen is that you will see this page where you can just start the interview, you can join the interview, depending on whether you're the host or the candidate. And from there, you will be redirected to the interview page. Okay. So this will be what the initial page will look like. So it's quite similar to other coding platforms. If you have done coding interviews before, you have the webcam view for both the interviewer and the interviewee. When you first join, there are buttons that you have to click on to enable sound and to enable webcam. And then on the top left, you can see that you can switch between video gallery view and you can switch to see the interview questions itself. And then at the bottom left, you can just exit or end the interview. Okay, so once you click on any of the questions, this is roughly what you will see. So let's start on the left side. You can see that there are two questions set up. So what we have done is we've chosen not to put the question there because we are letting you all choose your own questions. So you can choose what question you want to test the other person and what the person prefers. From there, you can see that on the bottom left, you can still see the webcam view itself and the leaving of the interview. And then now in the middle part, we do see the so-called question itself along with a few tabs. So there are things like test cases, console output, pass runs, and at the bottom there's a notes tab. So when you click on the notes tab, it will just open a small notes menu for you to basically type in notes. So take note that during the interview, you want to take notes about the other person. So things like whether their solution is good, whether they're communicating well, what sorts of questions they're asking. This is to provide them feedback after the interview. So one thing to note is that because this platform is still under development, when you close the interview, so essentially when the interview ends, you will not be able to access the notes again. So what I recommend is perhaps you can copy the notes into a notepad or just directly share the feedback before you guys end the interview. Okay, so on the right side, we have something like like a usual VS Code or like Vim or whatever. So from there, you can choose 3 different languages. You can choose Python, Java, C++, and also C. So the interviewer will want to paste the question here. So for example, you can go on LeetCode, choose a question and just paste it there, both the context and perhaps the boilerplate code. And then from there, the candidate can continue writing the code and both users will be able to see the update live. So let's say you want to run the code. On the bottom right, you just need to click run. It will run the code here, and then you can click on the console output to see what came out of it. So let me share what this will look like. So give me a moment. Okay, so here, right, on the left, I have so-called my host view. What happens after I click the link? On the right is the same thing. So let's say I log in, right? Okay, so on the left is the host, on the right is the candidate. So-called this is how it's set up. But what will happen is that you both must take turns to interview each other. So let's say we press next. Next. Okay, join interview. So waiting for the host. The host needs to start the interview. Okay, so we have started the interview. So if you wanna unmute, you wanna I guess start your audio, start your webcam, you can click on these buttons. So let's say we want to go to the first question, right? So we click on the first question. Both the candidate and the interviewer have to click on the first question. So from here, what happens is that we will see some instructions. For example, I put in some notes for the interviewer and also how we're gonna run this session. So for example, participants should alternate between interviewer and interviewee. So what happens is that the interviewer can go on something like LeetCode to copy, some solutions. For example, So for example, you can just copy this question, come over here and just paste it. So you can see that both sides will actually see it. Apologies for how small it is right now. From there, basically anyone can code. So let's say the interviewer wants to code. The interviewer wants to code. So let's say define hello and print. So something like that. So after that, what happens is that they can run the code. So let's say they run the code. Let me see whether I can see the console output. Okay, don't see the console output, but you will be able to see the console output. Yeah. So after that, let's say anybody once you all solve the question, as the candidate is solving the question, the interviewer should be taking notes. For example, you can write communicated clearly about their solution, clarified solution before coding. You can ask good clarifying questions and went through good examples. So you can come back later and provide this feedback. So let's say we are done with the first candidate interviewing and the second candidate being the interviewer, we can swap. So I set up a second one. You can choose to use back the same I guess like sort of like repo here, but you can otherwise switch to this and then you can repeat the process here again. So this is what it'll look like. So at the end of the interview, remember to share your feedback. And one thing to note is that you shouldn't only focus on things like code correctness. I think what really matters is about the candidate's ability to think through the problem, solve the problem, and communicate, let's say, certain challenges or how they can deal with certain challenges. So once the interview is done, the host can end the interview. So make sure that you all click end interview for all rather than leave interview. Because if the host, so left side is the host, right? If the host doesn't end the interview, what's going to happen is that this interview session will just keep running on, and we don't know that you have completed the interview or that it is basically just wasting resources because it's a run-on resource. Yep, run-on session. So let's say I end interview for all. Then disconnect, you can just leave the interview. So take note that once you leave the interview, all notes cannot be accessed anymore. For example, you see I can't go back to any of this to look at notes anymore. Yeah, even if I try to rejoin, I actually won't be able to rejoin. Yeah. So I think that about covers it for Koditsu. Yeah, let me go back to the slides. Okay, yeah, feel free to ask questions if you have any later. Yeah, Alyssa, you can take over.
Yep. I'll now share more about the pairing for the mock interviews. So you can contact the other person via their Cosmology email. And then if you cannot find their email on Cosmology, search out their name on the NUS Net Outlook address book. And then you should arrange the time when will the mock interview be. And then you can choose to communicate via Telegram, etc. So both participants will have to interview each other regardless of whether their assignment host or candidate. And note that you will not be paired if you fail to meet the requirements without approved exclusions for the past 2 weeks. So our priority is to ensure that everyone must interview experience will be pleasant. As such, we'll unfortunately have to remove those who may not be able to commit to our program. So please establish contact by the end of Friday. And if your partner does not respond by the end of Friday, please contact us and let us know ASAP, and we will arrange for an alternative partner for you. And if you cannot participate in the interview for any reason, please let us know ASAP as well. So important, the host must end the interview once the interview is complete. So this will allow us to track the completion and prevent prolonged sessions. So I'll share more about the rules for mock interviews. So firstly, during the mock interview, the two participants must take turns to interview each other. Each participant will be asked one question, and you will need to prepare a question before the mock interview to ask the other participant. It is best to check with the other participant what difficulty they wish to attempt prior to the interview. And you may wish to attempt an easier question during mock interviews so that you can practice your communication skills instead of spending time getting stuck on hard questions. So as an interviewer, try to take down notes via the Codisu app about how the other participant is doing. So this will be shared with the other person at the end. So for example, are they asking good questions? Is the approach very original, interesting? Or perhaps what they didn't do so well. For example, were there parts where you were unable to follow their thought process, and can their code be improved? Also, as of 2nd June 2025, any notes cannot be accessed by the user after the interview ends. So we recommend copying, pasting the notes externally before ending the interview. And then we are still working with the Codisu team to resolve this. So this is the end of our lecture today. You're free to go off, and if you have any questions, you can always type in the group chat.